Ibrahim Traoré is a Burkina military officer and political leader whose rapid rise to power has made him one of the most discussed young leaders in Africa. He was born on March 14, 1988, in Kera, a community in Burkina Faso, where he spent part of his early life before continuing his education in Bobo-Dioulasso. During his school years, Traoré developed an interest in science, and he eventually completed his secondary education before moving to Ouagadougou for university studies. He studied at the University of Ouagadougou, where he pursued geology and completed his university education before beginning his professional military career. After completing his studies, Traoré entered the Georges Namono Military Academy in Po, where he received the military training that prepared him for service as an officer in the Burkinabe Armed Forces. According to the official biography published by the Presidency of Burkina Faso, he completed his officer training with a strong academic and military performance and graduated with the rank of second lieutenant. His military career developed quickly, and he was promoted to lieutenant in 2014 before receiving the rank of captain in 2020 as a young officer. Traoré served in several parts of Burkina Faso, including areas heavily affected by the growing security crisis and attacks by armed extremist groups. His experience in regions such as the Sahel, the North, the Center-North, and the East exposed him directly to the difficult security challenges facing the country. He also participated in international military operations and United Nations peacekeeping activities, giving him experience beyond Burkina Faso and exposing him to different military environments. By the time Traoré became more widely known, Burkina Faso was already facing a serious security crisis, with armed groups carrying out attacks and large numbers of people being affected by the conflict. The deteriorating security situation created growing frustration among soldiers and civilians who believed that the government was struggling to protect communities and restore stability. In March 2022, Traoré was appointed commander of an artillery regiment based in Kaya, a position that placed him within an important part of the country's military structure. His name became nationally prominent later that year when political and military tensions intensified after Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Santiago de Miba had taken power in an earlier military coup. On September 30, 2022, Ibrahim Traoré and other soldiers overthrew de Miba, arguing that the authorities had failed to deal effectively with the worsening security situation. The coup made Traoré a central figure in Burkina Faso at an exceptionally young age and quickly transformed him from a relatively unknown military officer into the country's most powerful political figure. His rise to power was closely connected to the frustration among parts of the military over the continuing attacks and the government's inability to provide sufficient security. On October 21, 2022, Traoré formally took the oath of office and became the transitional president of Burkina Faso and commander-in-chief of the country's armed forces. His emergence attracted enormous attention because he was only in his 30s when he became the country's leader, making him one of the youngest national leaders in the world at the time. From the beginning of his leadership, Traoré presented himself as a leader determined to strengthen Burkina Faso's sovereignty and reduce dependence on foreign powers. His speeches and public appearances have frequently emphasized African sovereignty, national independence, self-reliance, and the importance of Africans taking greater responsibility for their own future. These messages have made him particularly popular among some young Africans who see him as a symbol of a new generation of leaders challenging traditional political relationships. At the same time, his leadership has also attracted criticism from opponents who question the military government's democratic legitimacy and its approach to political freedoms and governance. Traoré's image has therefore developed in two very different directions, with supporters portraying him as a young nationalist fighting for African independence, while critics point to the risks of prolonged military rule. His public popularity has also been amplified by social media, where videos of his speeches, military appearances, and political messages have spread widely across Africa and among the African diaspora. Many supporters compare his style and ideas with those of Thomas Sankara, the former Burkinabe revolutionary leader, whose legacy remains highly influential in Burkina Faso. Traoré himself has repeatedly invoked themes associated with national sovereignty and economic independence, helping strengthen the perception that his leadership represents a continuation of some of Sankara's ideas. However, the comparison between the two leaders remains a subject of debate because Burkina Faso under Traoré faces a very different political, economic, and security environment from the country Sankara governed decades earlier. One of the biggest challenges confronting Traoré has remained the fight against armed extremist groups, because military success against these groups is essential to his government's promise to restore security throughout the country. His government has also sought to strengthen Burkina Faso's military capabilities and increase the country's ability to rely on its own resources while developing new international partnerships. The story of Ibrahim Traoré is therefore not simply the story of a young soldier who suddenly became president, but also the story of a country struggling with insecurity, political instability, questions of sovereignty, and the search for a different direction. His journey from a student studying geology to a military officer, and eventually the leader of Burkina Faso, is one of the most remarkable political transformations in contemporary Africa. And, as his influence continues to grow, the biggest question remains whether Ibrahim Traoré can turn his promises of sovereignty, security, and national development into lasting results for the people of Burkina Faso. After taking power in Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré quickly became known for his strong emphasis on national sovereignty and his determination to change the country's relationship with foreign powers. One of the most important aspects of his leadership has been his government's decision to reduce the country's military dependence on France, which had maintained a significant security relationship with Burkina Faso for many years. Traoré's government eventually requested the departure of French military forces from Burkina Faso, and the withdrawal became an important symbol of the country's changing foreign policy. The decision was welcomed by many of Traoré's supporters, who argued that Burkina Faso should have greater control over its security strategy and should be free to choose its own international partners. At the same time, the decision generated controversy because critics questioned whether reducing cooperation with France would make it more difficult for Burkina Faso to fight armed extremist groups. Traoré responded to such criticism by emphasizing that Burkina Faso needed to develop its own military capabilities rather than depending heavily on foreign forces to defend its territory. His government therefore placed considerable attention on recruiting and equipping additional soldiers and volunteer forces as part of the broader effort to confront insecurity. The authorities also promoted the idea that ordinary Burkinabe citizens could play an important role in defending their communities and supporting the national security effort. However, the security situation has remained extremely difficult, and armed groups continue to operate in parts of Burkina Faso despite the government's military efforts. The conflict has caused displacement, loss of life, and humanitarian challenges, making the restoration of security one of the most difficult responsibilities facing Traoré's administration. Another major change under Traoré has been the strengthening of relations with neighboring countries that have also experienced military takeovers and disagreements with France. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have increasingly presented themselves as a new political and security bloc in the Sahel, eventually forming the Alliance of Sahel States. The three countries have sought to deepen cooperation in areas such as defense, diplomacy, economic policy, and regional security, while reducing their dependence on traditional Western partners. In January 2024, the leaders of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger announced their intention to leave the Economic Community of West African States, commonly known as ECOWAS, following years of political tensions. Their governments argued that ECOWAS had become hostile toward their countries, and that the organization no longer reflected their interests and security priorities. the decision created significant political consequences because ECOWAS had historically played an important role in regional diplomacy and economic integration across West Africa. Traoré's government has also increasingly looked toward countries such as Russia for military and diplomatic cooperation, reflecting the broader geopolitical changes taking place across the Sahel. Russian involvement in the region has attracted considerable international attention, particularly because Moscow has sought to expand its influence in Africa, while Western governments have expressed concerns about security cooperation with Russia. For Traoré and his supporters, however, establishing partnerships outside the traditional Western sphere represents an opportunity for Burkina Faso to diversify its international relationships. His government has also placed strong emphasis on economic sovereignty, with officials frequently speaking about increasing local production, reducing dependence on imported goods, and using the country's natural resources to support national development. Burkina Faso is rich in natural resources, particularly gold, and the mining sector has long been an important part of the country's economy. Under Traoré, the government has pushed for greater national involvement in the mining sector and has argued that Burkina Faso should receive more benefits from its own natural resources. The authorities have also promoted initiatives aimed at increasing domestic agricultural production, because food security has become increasingly important in a country affected by insecurity and displacement. Traoré has frequently encouraged Burkinabe citizens to produce more food locally and reduce dependence on foreign imports as part of his broader vision of self-reliance. His administration has also promoted infrastructure and development projects, including initiatives related to roads, agriculture, mining, and public services. Supporters view these efforts as evidence that Traoré is attempting to move beyond military and political issues and create a more economically independent Burkina Faso. Another major element of his political image is his public presentation as a relatively modest and patriotic leader who wants to remain connected to ordinary Burkinabe people. Images of Traoré wearing military clothing and speaking about African sovereignty have become extremely popular online, especially among young audiences who follow African political content on social media. His popularity has extended beyond Burkina Faso, with supporters in several African countries viewing him as part of a broader movement demanding greater independence from foreign political and economic influence. Nevertheless, Traoré's government has faced serious criticism concerning freedom of expression, political opposition, press freedom, and the length of the military transition. Human rights organizations and international observers have raised concerns about alleged abuses committed during the conflict and about the treatment of journalists, activists, and people perceived as opposing the military authorities. The government has defended its actions by arguing that the country is fighting an existential security crisis and that extraordinary measures are necessary to protect national security. The debate surrounding Traoré therefore remains complicated because his supporters focus heavily on sovereignty, national pride, and security, while his critics emphasize democratic institutions, human rights, and civilian oversight of the military. Despite these controversies, Ibrahim Traoré has continued to maintain a powerful political presence, and his speeches regularly attract significant attention both inside Burkina Faso and across the African continent. His leadership has become part of a larger debate about whether African countries should continue relying on traditional Western alliances or develop alternative partnerships and stronger forms of regional cooperation. The answer to that debate will depend not only on Traoré's speeches and political decisions, but also on whether his government can deliver lasting security, economic growth, and improved living conditions for ordinary Burkinabe citizens. As Burkina Faso continues to navigate political, economic, and security challenges, Traoré's leadership remains one of the most closely watched political developments in modern West Africa. Ibrahim Traore has continued to present his leadership as part of a broader effort to build a more independent Burkina Faso that can determine its own political, military, and economic priorities without excessive dependence on foreign powers. One of the strongest themes in his speeches has been the idea that African countries should rely more heavily on their own people, resources, institutions, and productive capacity instead of depending on external assistance. For Traoré, national sovereignty is not limited to political independence because he also connects sovereignty with food production, economic development, natural resources, military strength, and the ability of a country to make decisions in its own national interest. This vision has resonated with many young Africans who believe that the continent possesses enormous natural and human resources, but has not always benefited sufficiently from its own wealth. Traoré has therefore become a popular figure among people who want to see African governments take a stronger position when negotiating with foreign governments and international companies. His government has also emphasized the importance of agriculture because food security is considered an essential part of national independence in a country where insecurity has disrupted farming activities and displaced many communities. The authorities have encouraged agricultural production and promoted initiatives intended to increase domestic food supplies while reducing the country's dependence on imported products. Another important part of the government's agenda has been the development of Burkina Faso's mining industry, especially because gold remains one of the country's most important natural resources. Traoré's administration has argued that Burkina Faso should capture a larger share of the value created by its mineral resources and should strengthen national participation in the mining sector. This approach reflects his broader argument that African countries should not simply export raw materials while receiving limited economic benefits from resources extracted from their own territories. His government has also promoted the development of local industries and greater processing of natural resources within Burkina Faso, as part of a strategy aimed at creating jobs and increasing national economic value. However, transforming these ambitions into long-term economic results remains a difficult task because Burkina Faso continues to face security problems, limited infrastructure, and significant economic pressures. The security crisis is perhaps the greatest challenge facing Traoré because the government's political credibility is closely connected to its ability to protect civilians and regain control of areas affected by armed groups. Thousands of people have been displaced by the conflict, while communities in affected regions continue to face serious difficulties accessing education, healthcare, food, and other essential services. The government has expanded military recruitment and encouraged citizens to support the national defense effort, but military operations alone cannot easily resolve the deeper social, economic, and political causes of instability. For this reason, the future of Burkina Faso will depend on whether security improvements can eventually be combined with effective governance, economic opportunity, and stronger public institutions. Traoré's relationship with the international community has also remained controversial because his government has chosen a foreign policy that differs significantly from the traditional approach followed by previous Burkinabe governments. His closer relationship with Mali and Niger has created a new regional political dynamic in the Sahel, particularly through the Alliance of Sahel States and its efforts to strengthen cooperation among the three countries. The alliance has presented itself as a way for the three governments to defend their sovereignty and coordinate their responses to common security and economic challenges. Supporters believe this regional cooperation could eventually produce a stronger and more independent Sahelian bloc capable of negotiating with larger international powers on its own terms. Critics, however, argue that the withdrawal from traditional regional structures could create economic and diplomatic difficulties and potentially reduce opportunities for cooperation with other West African countries. The future effectiveness of the alliance will therefore depend on whether its members can translate their political declarations into practical cooperation that improves security, trade, infrastructure, and living conditions. Traoré has also become a powerful symbol on social media, where photographs and videos of him are frequently shared with messages portraying him as a young African leader determined to challenge established political systems. This online popularity has helped create a strong personal image around Traoré, although social media representations do not always capture the full complexity of the political and security situation in Burkina Faso. Some supporters describe him as a revolutionary leader inspired by the legacy of Thomas Sankara, while others caution against comparing the two men too closely because they governed in very different historical circumstances. Sankara's influence remains particularly strong in Burkina Faso because he became associated with ideas of integrity, self-reliance, social transformation, and African sovereignty. Traoré's repeated references to similar principles have strengthened the perception among some supporters that his government represents a revival of a nationalist political tradition within Burkina Faso. Nevertheless, history will ultimately judge his leadership according to concrete results rather than speeches, symbols, or popularity on social media. If his government succeeds in improving security, strengthening the economy, increasing food production, and improving public services, Traoré could be remembered as a leader who helped Burkina Faso move toward greater national self-reliance. If the security crisis remains unresolved or political institutions become increasingly restricted, historians may instead view his period in power as another chapter in the cycle of military interventions and political instability that has affected the Sahel. This is why Traoré's story remains unfinished, because his eventual historical reputation will depend on decisions that are still being made and challenges that have not yet been completely resolved. At the center of his political message is the belief that Africans should have confidence in themselves and should use their own resources and abilities to build stronger societies. That message has given him an unusually strong following among some young people across Africa who are searching for leaders who speak openly about sovereignty, dignity, and independence. Yet leadership requires more than inspiring speeches, because the people of Burkina Faso ultimately need security, education, healthcare, jobs, food, and stable institutions that can continue working beyond any individual leader. The greatest test of Traoré's leadership will therefore be whether his government can transform its powerful nationalist message into practical improvements that ordinary citizens can experience in their daily lives. His journey from a geology student to a military officer, and then to the leader of Burkina Faso, demonstrates how rapidly political circumstances can transform an individual's life and place that person at the center of national history. Today, Ibrahim Traoré remains one of the most recognizable young political figures in Africa, and his leadership continues to generate both admiration and controversy across the continent. His story also reflects a much larger African conversation about sovereignty, foreign influence, natural resources, military cooperation, democracy, and the future direction of the continent. Whatever the final judgment of history may be, Ibrahim Traoré has already become an important figure in the modern political history of Burkina Faso and the wider Sahel region. His greatest challenge now is to demonstrate that the vision of a sovereign and self-reliant Burkina Faso can become a sustainable reality that benefits the country's population for generations to come.